In addition to bundling our files, I also want to put together a quick Gulp file that will allow us to create a bundle file and then minify that file so that we get an even smaller download for the application. Minification can typically cut the size of a JavaScript file at least in half, and that's my experience with the Aurelia bundle. And to do all this, I'm going to be using Gulp. There's quite a few courses that cover Gulp, and if you've watched any of those or used Gulp yourself, you'll probably know that you need to npm install Gulp, both globally, the Gulp CLI, which I've already done, and I also need to install Gulp locally, and I'll throw in the save dev flag so that appears in my JSON file. And now let's create a Gulp file. One of the nice things about using Gulp with Visual Studio 2015 is that Visual Studio 2015 does provide some integration with Gulp. It does understand what tasks are inside. But I want a Gulp configuration file. That just means it's a JavaScript file named gulpfile.js. And to get started, let's see if we can put together a task that will create our bundle. So I will create a task called bundle, and this will take a function. And what I can do to execute Aurelia bundle is pull in something called exec. This is from a built-in module, child_process.exec. And what I can do inside of this task is to say execute on the shell, basically, Aurelia bundle. And when that is complete, it will call back into this function. And basically, I need to propagate any errors that might have occurred during Aurelia bundle. And I can do that by taking a callback parameter in the function for this task. And that parameter will be a function. I can then invoke that function and pass in an error or an error object that is passed into this callback function for the exec. This is a fairly common pattern in Gulp, and really a common pattern for Node.js in general. And just having that one task in place, I should be able to come out to the shell and say Gulp bundle. And that will run the bundling and put my inject back in place so that the number of requests should be back down below 60. And now let's try to minify that file so we don't have so many kilobytes transferred. To minify, I'm going to npm install something known as Gulp Uglify. You might be familiar with Uglify as a very popular tool for minification. It makes the source code ugly. And with Uglify installed, let me get a reference to that here. So Uglify will be what happens when I require gulp-uglify. And now let's create another task. Gulp.task. Uglify is something that will depend on bundle being run first. So I want to bundle and then uglify. And to uglify, what I will do is first grab my source code, which in this case is now just a single file. It's in www.root. It is the app bundle.js file. I will take that file and pipe it into uglify, and then take the output of uglify and pipe that into the destination, which if I just put www.root here, that will write out appbundle.js into www.root, so I'm effectively replacing the existing appbundle.js with a minified version. And now I could also come into my default task and just essentially say that the default task is to uglify the files, which will, of course, first bundle the files. And because I now have a default task, I should just be able to type gulp. And this will first bundle, and then uglify the bundle. And I should now be able to refresh the application. And we've got a little bit of a smaller payload. And at this point, I should mention, at the time of this recording, Aurelia hasn't been officially released. And one of the areas that the team is going to concentrate on next is performance and performance optimizations, including the amount of time required to get an application started up and the amount of code needed to get an application started up. So some of the hard numbers that you're seeing here should improve in the future. And this is just one approach to a development workflow in working with Aurelia. In this workflow, I'm going to rely on the bundling to put all my files together for a release build, and it's very simple to use JSPM unbundle to go back to a scenario where all of the modules are loaded individually. And other projects, for example, the sample skeleton navigation application that is part of the Aurelia project, and the contacts application that we looked at in the introduction to this course in the first video module, they make much more extensive use of Gulp to do a lot of upfront building and linting and moving files around. So there's a lot of different options and flexibility on how you ultimately go about delivering an Aurelia application to the browser. Hopefully this module gave you some ideas, some simple ideas, about how to use the Aurelia CLI tool in combination with Gulp to provide a simple but effective build system.